The brass band skipped a beat. The moment he stopped, full dress whites, rows of medals, and eyes fixed on me. Ruthie Hammond, 67, part-time baker, and full-time invisible, felt the Civic Center's air turn sharp, like the lemon cleaner on the floor. That old patch on my apron, turns out it still speaks. Ever had someone see something in you that everyone else missed? Ruthie Hammond stood in the rear kitchen of Bayfield's Civic Center, tying the strings of her faded apron. The small green patch sewn near the waistline had long lost its thread's shine, but she still centered it with quiet care. She moved without sound, lifting metal chairs one by one from the storage stack, unfolding them into perfectly aligned rows. Each motion bore the same precision she'd used decades earlier, lining up stretchers in high school gymnasiums turned hurricane shelters. Measured, equal, never seen. The Civic Center smelled of starch and pledge polish mixed with the tang of lemon drink and peanut pie. Ceiling fans whirred, casting slow, swaying shadows. Red, white, and blue streamers drooped slightly in the humidity, and the floor tiles hummed faintly under her soft, orthopedic soles. Ruthie straightened a paper banner near the punch bowl, her fingers pausing a moment to smooth out a wrinkle that no one else would have noticed. At 9:12, the front doors groaned open. Jimmy Callahan, 13, red-cheeked and slightly winded, appeared with 2 plastic bags. One swung wildly, bumping his knee with every step. "Miss Ruthie, I brought the lemonade tubs and I think one of them is leaking." "Wait, is that a patch on your apron?" She smiled gently, relieved he'd noticed something other than the streamers hanging crooked. "One of them, yes." "Now, sugar, would you mind setting those on the table next to the peanut pie? The crusts are still cooling." Jimmy squinted at the patch, but didn't press. "Looks old." "It is," she said simply, lifting the bag from his grip before it slipped again. From the other sim of the hall, Marilyn Odell emerged like a summer storm, heels clicking, clipboard clutched tight. Her gray-streaked bob bounced with every step. "Ruthie, could we shift the pies to the second table? The veterans' wives are asking about gluten-free again. I told them we don't bake with politics." She vanished before Ruthie could respond. Ruthie adjusted the tablecloths, murmuring to herself, "It's pecans, not politics." "Hey, Miss Ruthie." Frankie Turlow grinned as he entered from the loading dock, pushing a cart of soda cans. He popped a can open with one hand and raised an eyebrow. "Is that patch a fossil?" "Come with the dinosaurs?" She laughed, the sound soft like steam rising from a kettle. "Older than you, for sure." Frankie whistled and tipped his can in salute. As the clock edged toward 10, the Civic Center began to fill. Neighbors came in 2s and 3s, some trailing toddlers, others bearing casserole dishes like offerings. Ruthie moved among them, offering napkins, refilling lemonade, smiling when needed. Near the dais, a folding table held the framed veterans' tribute photo, black and white edges curled slightly. Ruthie set it straight, then let her fingertips trace over one name at the bottom. Ray Hammond. Her Ray. He'd hated formal photos, but this one captured the kindness behind his stern brow. No one else noticed her linger. They moved past with polite nods, lost in chatter about fireworks and parking spaces. Ruthie pressed her palm briefly to the tabletop as if anchoring herself. She smoothed the cloth on the pie table and caught her reflection in the steam tray lid, apron patch, pressed shirt, the same old shoes. No one looks twice. A logistics volunteer enters reading from a clipboard. Admiral Miles expected at 11:00. Ruthie doesn't react except for the faintest narrowing of her eyes. Jimmy leaned on the counter, sipping lemonade and staring at Ruthie's apron. "You know, that patch kinda looks like the emergency badges they hand out at hurricane drills." Ruthie didn't look up right away. Her hand was inside her purse, fingers brushing the edge of a paper folded so often it felt like cloth. A corner of it peeked out now, the faded emblem of the Red Line Civil Aid Program, still visible though the ink had begun to blur into the creases. Outside, the brass band began to warm up their tuning notes, floating in through the half-open doors like scattered puzzle pieces. Ruthie watched the dust motes drift in a slant of sunlight, their paths interrupted only by the rattle of the ceiling fans overhead. Volunteers moved around her carrying trays of cornbread and stacks of event flyers. The Memorial Day program was in full swing, but Ruthie stood anchored in the kitchen, the hub of everything and nothing. Jimmy stayed close, bouncing his sneaker toe against the base of the pie table. "So, what did you do during the Bay Ridge flood? My mom said it was the worst one in 50 years. Ruthie wiped her hands on a dish towel. "It wasn't the worst. It was just the one we didn't see coming. Power went first, phones after. We boiled river water on camping stoves for 3 weeks. Were you in the army or something? No, hon." "Civil aid." She gave him a soft smile. "That patch helped me through doors when no one else had keys." He stared at it as if trying to decode an old map. "So it's like a pass." "It was more like permission," she said, to step in when stepping back would have been easier. Just then the front doors whooshed open and a gust of warm air followed Luke Hammond inside. Tall, tan, and holding a folder beneath one arm, he scanned the room before catching sight of his mother. "Mom," he called with a brightness that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I told you to take it easy this year." "I am," she replied, reaching for another stack of plates. Luke kissed her cheek and set down the folder. "I mean it. The committee can handle the details." Ruthie gave him a look that said, "That's exactly what I'm afraid of." Mrs. Fairchild appeared at Luke's elbow, clapping her hands twice. "Darling, your mother's been invaluable, absolutely irreplaceable, but we do need to rearrange for the sponsor display. I trust the pies can shift." Ruthie nodded before the question finished forming. "Of course." The table moved with a scrape. Ruthie tucked her patch back into the fold of her apron and wheeled her desserts closer to the back near the industrial mop sink. Jimmy followed, holding a plate of napkins like it was a peace offering. "You okay, Miss Ruthie?" "I've been okay for longer than most folks think," she replied, straightening a pie tin. Across the room, Mason and 2 other teens were adjusting a tripod. The camcorder blinked red in standby. He wore a denim jacket over a t-shirt that read, "Future filmmaker, present genius." As he passed the dessert table, he glanced at Ruthie and smirked. "She wears that patch like it means something," he muttered to the other teen loud enough. Ruthie didn't flinch. She simply returned to setting forks beside each plate, as if the comment had been lost beneath the clatter of serving spoons. But Jimmy heard. His lemonade cup crinkled in his grip. He stared at Mason, fists slightly clenched, then turned to Ruthie and said, "What did it really mean back then?" The crowd parted like a school of fish. A man in full dress whites with rows of medals shining even in the muted hall light walked in. Admiral Gregory Miles. Ruthie's hands paused mid-fold as the main doors closed behind him. The hum of conversation lowered, not silenced, but softened like a curtain drawn halfway. She had just finished straightening the dessert table again, fussing over the napkins more than they likely needed. Earlier that morning, she had adjusted the patch on her apron with a touch more care than usual. Now across the room, that patch met a pair of eyes that recognized it. The Admiral didn't stride, didn't march. He moved with the measured rhythm of someone used to waiting for a room to catch up to his presence. A few people clapped tentatively, unsure if that was protocol. Others followed. The applause rolled through the Civic Center like a polite wave, respectful but reserved. After all, few in that crowd really knew him. They knew the uniform, not the man. Outside, the brass band had shifted to a Sousa march, but the notes floated weakly through the back doors, now slightly ajar. Photographers, mostly young one with a press badge too big for his collar, drifted between tables, snapping candids of veterans in ball caps and lapel pins. The scent of mustard and vinegar from potato salad clung to the air. Ruthie stood behind her pie display, like a docent at a museum no one visited. Her shoulders, usually sloped into comfortable humility, seemed to brace themselves. She didn't move when the Admiral passed the podium, nor when he shook hands with Mayor Callis and exchanged nods with Mrs. Fairchild. She barely blinked when Mason turned his phone toward the center aisle, half interested, half bored. But when the Admiral took a right at the speaker's dais and began walking toward the back, Ruthie's thumb brushed the edge of the patch. She didn't look down. She didn't need to. Jimmy nudged closer, standing near a tin of lemon bars. His lemonade cup was empty, forgotten in his grip. Mason's phone tilted subtly, lens shifting toward the rear of the room. Luke looked up from his coffee lips parting as he registered the Admiral's trajectory. His cup hovered halfway to the table, steam barely rising now. The Admiral's steps were soft but precise. Not a rustle in his white uniform. When he reached the dessert table, he stopped right in front of Ruthie. She looked up and their eyes met. No words passed between them. Instead, he extended a hand not to shake, but to lightly press his fingers against the faded patch on her apron. His fingertips rested there for only a moment, but in that pause, time seemed to hinge. Then, with quiet gravity, Admiral Gregory Miles straightened his back and brought his right hand to his brow. He saluted. A hush fell over the room. Chairs creaked as people turned. Forks froze midair. Even the brass band outside and unscripted missed its next note. Ruthie didn't move. Not to smile. Not to bow. She stood in the stillness she'd carried for years, the silence of shelters and sirens of hands, held through storm-black nights. The patch didn't shine. It didn't need to. Luke set down his coffee. Mason lowered his phone. Jimmy whispers, "Why did he salute her?" The Admiral's hand lowered. No one clapped. No one moved. Even the poppies on lapels seemed to hold their breath. The moment hung in the air like the scent of lemon pie and shoe polish, quiet, oddly suspended. Ruthie remained still, her hands folded in front of her apron. The patch looked smaller now, not in insignificance, but in humility, as though it had never asked for attention in the first place. From the front, Mrs. Fairchild cleared her throat. Once. Then again louder. Let's continue, shall we?" she said into the microphone, her voice too high. "We'll now begin the roll call of honor." Her words cracked through the silence like a dropped plate, and yet nothing returned to normal. The flags posted at each corner didn't flutter. No breeze passed. Sunlight spilled across the tile floor in sharper angles, now cutting across the room like stage lighting, picking out details once unnoticed. A plate with a single half-eaten cookie, a fan that had stopped spinning, condensation rings left by lemonade cups. Jimmy hadn't moved since the salute. He stood not far from Ruthie's elbow, his eyes still wide, his chest lifting with short, quiet breaths. Earlier, Ruthie had told him some things don't need explaining. Today, her silence echoed louder than any microphone in the building. The names began. Private Harold Jennings, Corporal Sheila Monroe, Sergeant Daniel Fry. Mrs. Fairchild's voice wavered, her page rustling as she turned. Faces turned toward the front again, but not for long. Many heads tilted back, subtly glancing over shoulders, eyes flickering toward the pie table and the woman in the faded apron, who didn't so much as flinch. Admiral Miles had taken a seat up front near the podium. his cap resting on his lap, but his gaze occasionally swept back, never lingering, but always returning. Luke approached during a break in the readings. His steps were slower than usual, more deliberate. He held a napkin in one hand, though nothing inside it. When he stopped in front of Ruthie, he didn't look around, didn't offer a smile. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, barely above a whisper. Ruthie's eyes softened, but she didn't speak right away. Her fingers pressed into the edge of the table, feeling the seam where two panels met. "Some stories," she said, "are better when they're lived, not told." Luke nodded. That was all. He didn't press further. Just stood with her a moment longer, then turned back to his seat. Jimmy stayed close. Closer than before, that his chin slightly tilted, like he was still waiting for the air to clear. Mason wandered near the back, no phone in hand now, just his usual slouch. He muttered under his breath to no one in particular. She probably made it up. Jimmy's shoulders tensed. He pivoted slightly, stepping between Ruthie and Mason, not confrontational, just present. Ruthie placed a hand gently on his arm. "No need," she said. Then with a voice that barely pushed past the hum of fans, Ruthie added, "He saluted the patch. Not me. That patch means people got out alive when I didn't think they would." The words dropped between them like anchors. Jimmy said nothing, but his grip on the empty cup in his hand relaxed. Outside, the brass band restarted lighter now, a peppy tune from the 1940s. It floated in through the open doors, trying to stir the room again. Volunteers resumed checking platters. Someone wiped down a table, but eyes still drifted back to Ruthie's table, even those that had never looked there before. That evening, Jimmy uploaded a blurry photo, Ruthie beside her dessert table, the patch just barely visible. The caption read, "Some patches don't need rank." The glow from his screen lit up his face as he stared at it, thumbs hovering over the keyboard, as if unsure whether to hit post. Then almost defiantly, he tapped it. The image vanished into the timeline. Ruthie sat on her porch with the same quiet presence she'd had in the Civic Center, a dish towel draped over her lap, and her apron now hung neatly on the wall hook, just inside the kitchen door. The wind chimes above her head swayed lazily, catching the breeze with a hollow clink. A coffee can with basil leaned slightly toward the porch rail, its leaves lifting in rhythm with the evening air. She wasn't expecting company, but she left the porch light on. Luke arrived with a cardboard box under one arm and cherry pie from Trudy's Cafe in the other. His knock was gentle, more habit than announcement. "I figured you hadn't had dessert yet," he said when she opened the door. "I've had plenty," Ruthie replied, "but not cherry." She gave him the tiniest smile and stepped aside. They sat on the porch, paper plates resting on their knees. The pie was sweet, a little too tart the way she liked it. Luke handed her the box without comment. She opened it to find a folded newspaper, yellowed and soft at the edges. The headline read, "Red Line Volunteers Rescue Dozens in Bay Ridge Flood." Below it, a grainy photo showed a line of women in plain vests pulling a stretcher through ankle-deep water. "There's your name," he said, pointing. "I looked it up after the ceremony." Ruthie traced the faded ink with her thumb. "It was a long time ago," she murmured. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" Luke asked, not accusing, just baffled. "You were busy becoming," she said softly. "I was just holding space." He looked at her, unsure what to say to that, so he didn't. The basil leaves fluttered again. Somewhere across the bay, a boat horn echoed. Across town, Mason stared at the TikTok video cued on his phone. It was already overdubbed with snarky audio clips from the Civic Center and a punchline that no longer felt funny. He sighed, deleted it with a swipe, then opened a blank blog draft. He typed slowly, then paused, then typed again. "The patch I laughed at. He didn't post it right away, just saved it. But Jimmy had already seen it. Mason had shared the link in a group chat with no caption. And Jimmy, with that same buzz of energy that made him interrupt adult conversations and ask too many questions, shared it with two classmates, who shared it again and again. Within the hour, the comment section began to swell, first with eye-roll emojis, then with a few "wait, this is real" replies, and finally with a string of thank you messages. One read, "My grandma was in Bay Ridge that year. Please tell her thank you." Another simply said, "Never ignore the quiet ones." At Ruthie's, the porch light flickered. She stood and stepped inside briefly, returning with a small envelope that had arrived with no fanfare earlier that day. Luke watched as she opened it. A folded card read, "Thank you for your years of service, both visible and not." It was signed by dozens of names, some she recognized, some she didn't. Tucked inside was a small brass pin in the shape of an anchor. She turned it over once in her palm, then held it to the porch light. "They still make these?" she asked. Luke smiled. "Apparently, yes." Her voice softened. "Anchor's not a title. It's a promise." Just then Luke's phone buzzed. A message from Jimmy. It was a screenshot Mason's blog, freshly published, already past 500 shares. The caption from Jimmy read, "She's gonna hate this." Luke typed back, paused, then hit send. "No. She'll just say it's the patch." 1 year later, at the same civic center, a single chair sits near the stage. On the seat, a folded apron. No plaque. No name. The light through the high windows had a warmer hue this time. Morning sun filtered in through paper stars and woven flags, casting soft shapes across the hardwood floor. The red, white, and blue bunting along the wall had been freshly ironed, and where the dessert table had always been a neat array of lemon bars, pecan squares, and cherry pies lined up with perfect spacing, like someone had taught them how to do it, and they hadn't forgotten. Ruthie arrived early. Of course she did. She wore a soft yellow cardigan, a pin of an anchor fastened near the collar, and slacks that hadn't quite lost their crease from the hanger. Her hair, still pinned the same way, framed her gentle expression as she helped align the framed veteran photos near the stage. No one directed her this year. They just nodded and moved aside when she stepped near. When the clock struck at 11, Ruthie took her seat, back row, far left. She could have sat up front. They'd offered. But she liked the rear view. Jimmy took the podium, his tie slightly crooked, shoes newly shined. He paused before speaking, glancing once toward the crowd, then toward the chair with the folded apron. His voice steadied after the first sentence. "I didn't know what courage looked like until I saw someone live it without asking for attention." Silence held for a moment after he spoke. Not awkward. Sacred. Then came the soft rustle of hands adjusting over hearts, a few sniffles, a cough somewhere near the side door. Ruthie didn't move. Her hands rested in her lap, one thumb gently rubbing the edge of her pin. Luke stood just behind her, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder, grounding her without tethering. He didn't speak either. At the media desk in the back, Mason worked the soundboard. He wore a dark button-down and a somber focus. He didn't fiddle, didn't joke. When the national anthem played, he rose and stood still, his phone tucked away. Later, he'd post the event video trimmed, just so that Ruthie's hands straightening a frame appeared as the soft prelude. Near the stage, beside the lone chair, Luke stepped forward during the tribute segment and laid the apron across the seat. Folded neatly. Patch facing up. It was the same faded green square that had once gone unnoticed year after year until it didn't. A few minutes later, another girl from the Junior Scouts placed a handwritten quote beside her own chair in the front row. Kindness doesn't make noise. Then a young man in ROTC blues added a small badge to the apron chair, a pin that read "Helper" from his first aid certification. No one announced the moment. No one clapped. But something shifted. A slow tide of quiet reverence swept through the room, not as ceremony, but as inheritance. The final salute came. The crowd rose. This time the brass music started on time, slower than last year, more deliberate. Then a man near the front, no longer in uniform, but still unmistakable, stood. Admiral Gregory Miles, now retired, placed his hand on his chest. He didn't speak, didn't step forward, just turned and nodded once toward the back of the room. Ruthie returned the nod with the faintest smile. That was all. As the crowd began to disperse, a young teacher near the middle aisle paused before leaving. She took a picture of the chair and apron, the sun hitting it just right, and uploaded it later that afternoon. Her caption was simple: "For the ones who stayed steady while no one watched." Some seats don't need a name to be remembered. In the quiet folds of an old apron and the hush before applause, a small town learned what real service looked like. Kindness, it turns out, doesn't require a uniform. It just needs someone steady enough to wear it year after year. Like a porch light left on in a storm, the gentlest acts often shine the longest. And if this story touched something in you, perhaps it's time to look again at those we pass by and the quiet anchors holding us steady all along.